I started my own hockey league, and my Discord community manages the teams. So we're not going to waste any time here. We're going to get right into it, and we're going to see our first ever SSHL offseason simulation in FHM 11. But first, I'm going to introduce the general managers of all 9 human control teams. For the Anaheim Ducks, you have LeGreen. For the Boston Bruins, you have Tom. For the Buffalo Sabres, you have Skyler. For the Calgary Flames, you have Phil. For the New York Rangers, you have M1. For the Pittsburgh Penguins, you have Damon. For the St. Louis Blues, you have PQ. For the Utah Mammoth, you have Drew. And for the Vegas Golden Knights, you have Treehouse Mountain. And before we even get started with the simulation, we have a lot of trades to announce here. We have, in fact, 7 trades to announce. And for our first ever trade in the league, you have Frankie Vetrano and Brock McGinn going to the Boston Bruins. So Tom making the trade for 2 veteran wingers. And then going the other way to Anaheim, you have the prospect center Fraser Minten, who is a 1.5-star consensus ability and a 2.5-star potential, along with defenseman Henry Jokiharju, as well as a first-round pick in the 2027 SSHL entry draft. So by trading away a couple of veteran wingers and acquiring a future first-round pick, Anaheim and LeGreen clearly looking to get younger and build for the future. We'll see what their simulation is like this year. And then it seems Boston is adding to their veteran presence, so maybe looking to make a run in the playoffs and possibly win the SSHL Cup, which is called the Simmers Cup. And here we have a trade between the Bruins and the Oilers. The Oilers are a computer-controlled team. And this is the second of many trades for Boston, which we will be seeing here in a minute. As going to Boston will be the veteran center Derek Ryan. So very defensive fourth-line center for Boston there. And in exchange, Boston sends to Edmonton Oliver Wahlstrom, the 24-year-old winger. So it'll be interesting to see how this strategy pans out for Tom and Boston, clearly looking to add a lot of veteran presence here. And for our next trade, you have Boston and Philadelphia. So once again, Tom making the moves. And for this one, Boston sends John Beecher and a 2026 third-round pick to Philadelphia in exchange for the 22-year-old winger Bobby Brink. So a solid young scoring winger. We'll see what his simulation is like. And then we have the only trade here made on July 1st that does not involve Boston. You have going to the Seattle Kraken, Kevin Hayes, alongside Pierre-Olivier Joseph, and a third-round pick in the 2025 SSHL draft. And then going back the other way to Pittsburgh, which is controlled by Damon22, you have Eli Tolvanen, the 2.5-star consensus ability winger. So we'll see what his simulation is like. There was a little bit of discourse about this in the Discord channel about this trade going through, but we'll see how this trade turns out for both Pittsburgh and Seattle. Especially interested to see how that third-round pick turns out, because this upcoming draft, let me tell you, is going to be very deep, and I have a feeling that third-round picks are going to be pretty valuable, at least in this year's draft, so we'll see how that pans out. For our next trade between Boston and Vegas, so Tom and Treehouse Mountain, and it's a pretty interesting one. To Vegas, you have Jonas Korpisalo with 50% of his salary retained by Boston, Fabian Lysel, who's the 21-year-old winger, 1-star consensus ability, 3.5-star consensus potential, and then Marat Kusnedinov, the 21-year-old center, 1.5-star ability, 2.5-star consensus potential. And then going back to Boston will be Ilya Samsonov, the 27-year-old goaltender, 2.5-star consensus ability. The 25-year-old winger Jonas Ronbjerg, 1.5-star consensus ability and 2-star consensus potential. And then you have a third-round pick in the 2025 draft and a fifth-round pick in the 2025 draft. So Boston getting a couple of draft picks in return for Lysel and Kusnedinov. We'll see what that does, especially in this year's draft. Once again, it's going to be a very deep draft, so we'll see who those 2 picks turn into. And then you have a trade between Boston and Utah. So once again, Tom and then Drew. Going to Utah, you have Nikita Zadorov, who is a 2.5-star consensus ability defenseman, 29 years of age, has a cap hit of $5 million for the next 6 years, alongside of Matthew Poitras, the 20-year-old center, 2-star ability, 3.5-star consensus potential. However, it is worth noting that Poitras is out indefinitely with an injury, so it's not known when he's going to come back. And then both of them alongside a first-round pick in the 2026 SSHL entry draft. And then going back the other way to Boston will be the 35-year-old veteran defenseman Ian Cole with a 2.5-star consensus ability, very defensive defenseman, and then a 5th-round pick from Utah in the 2027 SSHL entry draft. So I know this trade may seem a little lopsided, but I interpret this as a cap dump deal between Boston and Utah. Clearly Zadorov taking up a lot of cap hit in Boston's cap space, probably wanted to unload that contract, and getting a first first-round pick back in return for taking that contract is Utah. And then alongside, of course, Matthew Poitras. We'll see how he turns out with that indefinite injury. And then obviously Boston getting Ian Cole back in return with that $3.1 million cap hit, only for 1 year though. So that might make a big difference for Boston's cap situation going forward. So we'll see what happens with that. And then one final trade to end off July 1st. You have Andrew Peeke going to the Calgary Flames, the 26-year-old defensive defenseman, in exchange for Tyson Barrie going to the Boston Bruins, the 32-year-old offensive defenseman. So a very interesting trade there. Obviously switching defensive defenseman for offensive defenseman, and Boston gets yet another veteran on their squad. So with all that being done, we're finally going to advance in the simulation. We're going to, however, advance to August 1st because there is no draft in this year's offseason due to the fact that it is, it's 2024. We're just starting out. So no draft this year. So with that, we will officially begin the first ever SSHL simulation. All right, so we're now on August 1st. There's not much different to report. However, we do have a few free agent signings for Boston and Pittsburgh. Going to Boston, you have Maxime Comtois signing a 1-year deal for the league minimum. Then you have the 17-year-old Mark Hawkins signing a 3-year entry-level deal, in addition to the right winger Chad Petrovich and center Aaron Fox, who signed similar deals. And then you have the center Jurgen Meisel signing with Pittsburgh on a 3-year entry-level deal. And now just like that, we have simulated through August. We're now on September 1st. So let's take a look at what has happened over the course of this past month. In terms of signings and transactions, there wasn't much that happened in August, but we do have a couple of signings for Boston, who signed the 25-year-old defenseman Philip Ruse to a 1-year deal, and the 24-year-old defenseman Christian Felton to a similar 1-year deal. And then Boston also has a couple of extensions to announce. You have Derek Ryan signing a 1-year extension for $1.38 million, and then Tyson Barrie signing a 2-year extension for $1.32 million. But what did happen during August was the prospects tournament. Given that this was the first season in the league history, the game considers every player to be a rookie, right? So that means at least for this year's prospects tournament, you have players who wouldn't necessarily be considered prospects in the modern day NHL, in the real NHL, who are considered prospects in this save file. So you have Zegras, you have Perfetti, you have Leo Carlson, you have Rasmus Kupari, all considered as prospects by the game. And just like that, we're now on October 1st, which means we're just about ready to get underway with the regular season simulation. But that's not going to be until the next video, because in this one, we're going to go through a season preview. So first, let's take a look at the Anaheim Ducks, led by Legreen. In goal, you have Dostal and Husso. Then on defense, you have Trouba, who's 30 years of age, 3-star ability. Then you have Mintukov, who is only 20 years of age, with that 4-star potential according to the consensus. And then you also have Zellweger at 21 years of age, who is the 3.5-star potential. And then at forward, of course, you have Zegras. Of course, this was before the Zegras trade happened in real life, so Zegras is still in the Ducks here in the save file. And then you also have Leo Carlson and Cutter Gauthier, who have the 5-star and 4.5-star potentials respectively. So there's certainly some good young talent here on this team, but I think it's going to be a bit of a rough year for Anaheim based off what we're seeing here. Next up, you have Tom's Boston Bruins. You have Swayman and Samsonov in goal. On defense, you have McAvoy, Lindholm, a lot of great defensive simulators here who, at least during the preseason, were able to maintain high defensive grades. 82, 80, 77, 77, 74. No one less than a 71 defensive grade with Ian Cole. So it should be interesting to see how Boston does this year. And of course, even forward-wise, there are some very good defensive simulators here with Middlestat as 78 defensive grade, for Toronto 77. Of course, this was all preseason, but very interesting group that Tom has put together here with all the trades that he's made over the course of this offseason. And we'll see if they can manage to squeak into a playoff spot here, because at least based off what we've seen in the preseason, it looks like Boston's going to have a pretty interesting simulation this year. And then you have the Buffalo Sabres run by Skyler. So you have Luukkonen and Reimer in net. Luukkonen had a 91 grade during the preseason. Defensive core led by Dahlin and Power, so it should be interesting to see how Power grows over the course of these next couple of years especially. And then the forward core led by Tage Thompson, Alex Tuck, and Josh Norris. So obviously you don't really have too much star power up front, but you do have Dahlin on the back end, and you do have Luukkonen in goal. So it looks like for Buffalo, offense may be a bit of a struggle. We'll see how Thompson does. But of course, Buffalo being a young team should be pretty interesting to see where they go this year. And then you have the Calgary Flames led by Phil. In goal, you have Dustin Wolf and Dan Vladar. On defense, you have Rasmus Anderson and Mackenzie Weegar, but then the depth sort of falls off on defense after that. Then at forward, you have quite a bit of depth at forward. No one who's really going to stand out as far as star power, but you have Huberdeau, you have Kadri, you have Coleman, Frost, Farabee, Backlund. So a lot of depth up front for Calgary, but between having an aging forward core and not having much depth on defense, it's not looking great for Calgary's playoff chances, but we'll see if they can prove me wrong here. And then you have the New York Rangers led by M1. So in goal, you have Shesterkin and Quick. We'll see how Shesterkin is able to simulate in this save file. Obviously, goaltenders in this game can be a bit questionable, although it looks like he did have a pretty good preseason simulation with that 85 grade. And we'll see what happens with his contract going forward, as he is on the last year of his deal. So he's going to need to be extended this year, and we'll see if New York holds on to him. Then, of course, you have the defensive core led by Adam Fox, and then you have Borgens, Susi, Miller, Schneider. So you have some good depth there on defense combined with the star power of Adam Fox. But for New York's sake, they're going to have to hope that Fox stays healthy this year. And then, of course, you have the forward core highlighted by both JT Miller and Artemi Panarin. And then, of course, you have the young winger in Lafreniere. So a solid first line right there, it looks like. Then you have Zibanejad and Trocheck at center. Kreider's still there. And it's looking like the depth for the bottom six forwards for the Rangers isn't looking too great. But I think, as long as their superstars can pull through and they can stay healthy, then I think the Rangers do stand a good chance to make the playoffs this year. And then you have the Pittsburgh Penguins, who are led by Damon. So in goal, you have Jari and Blomqvist, both two-star abilities. I mean, as we know, the goaltenders in this game tend to, as I said, be a bit of a question mark. So we'll see what Jari does, or possibly Blomqvist. We'll see if Damon rolls with Blomqvist. And then, of course, on the defensive core, you have Carlson and Letang, so a couple of veteran offensive defensemen. And then, of course, you also have the 20-year-old defenseman Pickering, who has the 3.5-star potential. And then as we take a look at the forward core, obviously you still have Crosby, but 37 years of age. He's getting up there in age. We're not sure if this is going to be his last year. I don't think it will be, just based off his current ability and how much use he'll probably see in Pittsburgh, but you never know, right? And then, of course, you have Malkin, 38 years of age, 3.5-star ability. So that 1-2 punch at center for Pittsburgh on a limited time. And it doesn't look like after them, they don't have too much to work with here, as they do have Raquel, who's that 3-star ability, and Tolvanen, who they recently traded for with that 2.5-star ability. But everyone after Tolvanen is rated as a bottom 6 player at most. And then, of course, you do have McGrogerty, the 20-year-old winger, who is a 1.5-star ability and a 3-star potential. So we'll see how much he grows this year. Unfortunately for Pittsburgh, I think they're going to be a bit of a long shot for the playoffs. I think what has to happen here in Pittsburgh, if they intend on making the playoffs, is all of Crosby, Carlson, and Malkin producing offensively at an elite level, and then Jari and Blomqvist stealing the show in net. I think both of those things have to happen in order for Pittsburgh to stand a chance to make the playoffs this year due to their lack of depth and with their core players in general being on the wrong side of 30. And then you have the St. Louis Blues led by PQ. So you have Binnington and Hoffer in net. Looks like they both had a good simulation in the preseason. On defense, you have Parayko, Falk, Leddy, Suter, Broberg. So a lot of good depth on defense, and some very good defensive simulators as well. Parayko and Broberg with the 84 defensive grade, Kessel with the 81, 79, 76, 75, 75, 73, lowest 69 for Suter. And then at forward, you have Robert Thomas, 25 years of age, 4-star ability, 4.5-star potential. You have Kyrou, you have Buchnevich, and then you also have the young forwards in Bolduc and Holloway. I think they have the potential to be a wildcard team, assuming everything goes right for them. Because while they may not have too much star power on this team, they do still have a solid foundation in net and on defense. And then if Robert Thomas can light the lamp for them, I think they do stand a pretty good chance. And then you have the Utah Mammoth led by Drew. In goal, you have Vejmelka and Ingram. It looks like Ingram had a better simulation overall than Vejmelka did. We'll see if that carries over into the regular season. Then on defense, you have Sergachev, you have Dirtsey, and then you also have the 20-year-old defenseman Maverick Lemereau with the 3.5-star potential. And then at forward, you have Schmaltz, Keller, Cooley, Gunther, who's 21 years of age, 4.5-star potential. So a lot of good young players here in Utah. And I'll be honest, I think they could be a dark horse, especially if Mata is able to maintain that 90 defensive grade. That's a very impressive defensive grade for Olli Mata. And then combine that with the elite young talent of Cooley and Gunther, and then perhaps some luck in net, I think Utah may have a pretty good chance this year. And now for our last human-controlled team for the Vegas Golden Knights, led by Treehouse Mountain. In net, you have Hill and Corpusalo. On defense, you have Petrangelo, Theodore, Hannafin, a very deep defensive core here. Then you have their forward core led by Eichel, Stone. Then you have Hurdle, Barbashev, and Dorofeyev as some solid top 6 forwards. Pearson, Smith, a lot of depth on this team, it looks like. So based off what we're seeing here for Vegas, I do expect them to be making a run at the playoffs this year. So with that is the first SSHL offseason and preseason in the books. And the next one, we'll be starting our first ever regular season simulation. So we'll end things off here, but not before, of course, I thank the channel members. Thank you guys so much for all your supports, and I'll see you guys in the next one.